John Hawkins, who's a great writer, and I love his stuff. He blogs at Culturcidal, um, and he has an interesting book out we'll get to later. John, tell us a little about yourself and where you've been and where you're going.
Well, I'm one of the original conservative bloggers from back in the day. Wasn't one of the very first. I wasn't right up there with Glenn Reynolds at Instapundit, but I was out blogging in 2001. Page went absolutely nuclear in the, maybe, gosh, I guess it'd be 2014, 2015 when Facebook came along. We had a Facebook page that was, gosh, we were the equivalent of like the Washington Post, Breitbart, and the New York Times all combined. We did enormous, enormous amounts of traffic. We hit it at the right time. Facebook did not like that, and they killed us. We were also one of the first people they killed. So did really
What was
well
the
with
name of
that.
that site?
Right Wing News. Right Wing News, enormous site. You hear people talk about the Russian disinformation campaign through Facebook. We did that in a week, like the type of traffic they did over 2 years. I mean, so it was no big deal back then. Had a book that was for a little while top 50 in the self-help section, 101 things all young adults should know. It's not up in that rare air anymore, but it still does well. And I've been running a paid newsletter, Culturcidal, for the last couple of years. Love doing that. I write for myself. I've worked pretty much everywhere in the conservative world. I've worked for Dan Bongino, Town Hall, Human Events, PJ Media, just everywhere. So love to be on with you. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, you have a wonderful voice and a good cadence. So I imagine you've done some of your own video cast podcasts or.
I've done a little bit, but I've done hundreds and hundreds of hours as a guest on the radio. I mean, I've done a lot of it. When Right Wing News was enormous, I got invited on all the time. Don't do as much these days, but yeah, you still have the practice you put in. You don't lose it after a while. It's like riding a bike.
Yeah, that's a good thing. So what do you think happened to right wing news? Was it because would it have happened to middle of the road news or
No.
left wing news?
Well, I can give you the rundown. If you want to know what happened to Facebook in general, Facebook, when Trump started taking off, and I'm going to say this, you don't hear a lot of people say this, but I think Facebook had an awful lot to do with Trump getting elected in the first place.
Mhm.
It turned out a lot of people I like to think of as instinctive conservatives. A lot of people who are like, I like God, guns, and the flag, but they really don't follow politics that much, don't care that much about it. Well, all those people loved Trump. And Facebook just turned them out by the millions and millions. And they immediately, as soon as the election was over, they chomped down on Facebook and were like, hey, you guys are doing Russian disinformation. It's fake news. And Facebook started turning all the pages down. And we were one of the most prominent ones. Not all of them got crushed. There's still some out there that are doing very well with multiple pages. It's just so much more difficult at this point to make that work. It's just very hard. So yeah, they turned us down, and once the traffic turned way down, at the time we were running Right Wing News had 30 part-time employees, so I could have kept running it just myself and maybe one or two other people. But at a certain point, you're like, man, we've gone so far down, it's not coming back. I'm ready to get out of the game, so I did.
That's sad. There's a huge expenditure. I mean, you lose your income, and that they kind of can do that very meretriciously, kind of like the wave of a hand. Um,
And they do that. That's one of the reasons Twitter is the first thing I have put effort into in a long time, because I feel more comfortable with Elon on there. So I've built up maybe 8,000 or 9,000 followers in the last 3 or 4 months. I've been working them up I think I'm at 31, 32 now. But that's because I don't think he's going to turn me off. I have no confidence that if I build a huge Facebook page, they're not going to just shut it off one day. And this happens to people on YouTube. We saw this with the contract negotiations between Daily Wire and Steven Crowder. That's exactly. Steven Crowder had a good point. He's like, well, hey, you're going to cut my income big time if YouTube turns me off. But the Daily Wire also had a good response. We need that traffic to make you profitable. If we don't have that, we can't do it. So we're in a position as conservatives where a lot of our income, a lot of our reach, a lot of our attention is reliant on social media companies that hate and fear us and want to ideally shut us down. So it's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah. And it's not only that, it's just you wind up being kind of vagrants in the social marketplace. I was out in California probably a month ago, and Southern California, and at parts and at times in LA and environs. And there are encampments. I'm sure you've seen of people in RVs and whatnot, if they're lucky, and less than that. But there's almost that aspect where they don't mind putting us out, and they don't mind having you kind of like scrape by, and just trying to figure out maybe sleep under a tree or something like that. But there's this dichotomy. I forget the name of the law, but whether they are these social media groups, whether they're carriers or newspapers. If you can't sue Facebook for libel and slander of the things that other people carry, then they are a carrier, kind of like the old AT&T, your telephone or Sprint or MCI or whatever. They're not responsible for things that people say over those lines. So it's one or the other, and they seem to have the best of both worlds. And when Twitter, I guess, was knocking everybody off, there was Parler, and Facebook was doing the same thing. I forget which one. One was, there was one that was going to replace Facebook, one was going to replace Twitter, and then I guess whoever is hosting them just pulled the rug out. I wonder if remember it was Amazon. You probably know this better than I do.
Yeah, they did that with Parler. Parler was coming up and it was getting a lot of people, and then suddenly Facebook's like, well, you don't do a good. Excuse me, I'm sorry, Apple decided you don't do a good enough job of policing your people, so we're just going to pull you, and we won't allow people to get on your app. And they never recovered from that, although in all fairness, Parler wasn't technically very good. You've seen the same. Gab has had to pretty much just build their own secondary system of everything. They've had to do that, but there's so many things like that, and people don't think about it. Take something like Reddit, an enormous, incredible, important site. Reddit's extremely liberal. They kick people out for being conservative. They kick groups out. Google, I guarantee you, Google probably adds 2 or 3 points to the left in every single election because they skew their search results. This is going on all over the place. And Facebook plays the same game. Twitter, this is the first time you've had somebody say, hey, we're going to try to skew this down the middle. It's the first time in a long time. I will say, in all fairness, Facebook was not that bad in, let's say, 2014, 2015. A lot of them weren't. They just had a big change.
Yeah, they were not going to let the surprise happen twice. We saw that in Massachusetts. I met Scott Brown a number of times. I also met Mitt Romney a number of times. The Massachusetts Republican circle is relatively easy to mingle in. And so Scott Brown had that surprise election on the heels of the Obamacare broken promise healthcare, and so there was a Ted Kennedy seat opened up suddenly, and there he was, Scott Brown, and he popped in kind of like it wasn't Trumpian yet because there was reverse order, but they weren't going to let it happen again, and so the second go round, they were all ready for the kind of populist revolution, in a sense, that had been Scott Brown, and he was as centrist. He wasn't quite as conservative as we'd like, but Massachusetts, we take what we can. We have Charlie Baker, and we have had Mitt Romney and whatnot, and oftentimes Bill Weld. But oftentimes they're, even as liberal Republicans, they tend to be going down the hill to societal decay slightly slower than the full bore. So. Anyway,
true, but I mean, let's be honest. What are you going to get out of Massachusetts? I mean, the thing is not that doesn't bother me so much is those guys in Massachusetts or Susan Collins. It's more like Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. It's like, well, you should do better, bro. What's going on with you? Why do we get stuck with the Lindsey Graham or some of these, or Mitt Romney in Utah? It's like, oh my gosh, I wish they would do a better job. But I don't feel bad about having a squishy Republican in a squishy state. That's how it's supposed to be. I mean, you're not going to get, a great diehard conservative Republican elected in Massachusetts. Just never going to happen.
Yeah, no, it hasn't happened lately. They did vote for Reagan, I think, in
80 or 84.
Yeah, it was
definitely 80.
I think it was 84.
So probably both.
Yeah, not 80 was the closer election. That was the Jimmy Carter election.
He crunched Jimmy Carter pretty good, although
but not as much as he crushed Walter Mondale.
Yeah, true,
Um,
true.
so that was
Dukakis, Mondale.
1984 was the
Sorry.
last time.
Yeah.
But that anyway, I kind of want to maybe circle back to some of the articles you've been
Hmm.
writing lately. Maybe toss out a few titles and I can show them to people and tell us what your thought process is and um, well, we can go back a little bit and tell us how you came to the thoughts and opinions and how you've decided on this as a career move and where is the career and what are you putting out?
Well, as to, well, we'll just go to the career move part of it first. I've been doing things that are traffic based for a long time on the internet. Very successful with it. I could still do an outrage based news site, but you see those everywhere. One, I don't think it's healthy anymore. We were one of the first people doing it, right wing news, where everything's outrage and clickbaity, and we're going to get you to click through. Um, and I've actually written about it. I called it Doritos journalism. And you see this all the time, right? It's like you're like, how is this a story? Some guy called some guy a racist name in Nowhereville, North Dakota, and it's a hit story. What's going on with this? Or you see these type of things, and I think of that as Doritos journalism. People are going to click on it, but it's not real news, and I think that's fine. Like Doritos, it's not going to hurt you to eat, a handful of Doritos every week. But
Hmm.
when everything's Doritos, which is where we are, the mainstream media is now Doritos. Everything's Doritos. It's so bad for the public. So I don't want to be one more person doing that. And I also have this belief that may or may not turn out to be right, that the internet is moving towards a much more subscription based model. And I think you're going to see more and more people are going to be paying for individual channels and paying for individual people and supporting them. So I'd like to get to the point myself, and I'm not quite there yet, where I can get to, where I could just straight up make a lot of money off of subscriptions instead of just getting traffic. I mean, every article I'm writing is getting already like, gosh, I think the lowest one in the last this year is like 11,000. Like a lot of people are reading these things, but I want to get those paid subscriptions up. So that's where I'm working on. As to like articles, I tend to do things that are very cultural. And there's a little bit of psychology mixed in there, a little bit of economics. One of the ones I wrote recently, a lot of people I've gotten good feedback on, is beware of cheap dopamine.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you tell us a little about that? What do you
Sure,
mean by
sure.
that?
Well, dopamine is that chemical your body releases when you accomplish something or you feel good or it sort of drives you to go forward. And there's a lot of ways to get that. And one of the problems with our society right now is they're heavily weighed towards things that are not necessarily good for us or that are extremely, extremely easy. An example is going out and playing a video game. It's getting drunk. It's using pornography. These things are extremely easy to do, but they're not very productive for your life. And
Hmm.
you can very easily get into this huge cycle where you're just constantly all day bathing in these types of things where you're getting cheap dopamine. It's easy, you feel good, you're distracted. But all the good things that happen in your life, those all happen around expensive dopamine. Like you're talking about, like there's a game I played a few times. I like God of War. I played it a few times, not very much. I'm not a gamer, not much of one, but I mean, the people who play this thing 10 hours a day, and there are some, you could just go to the gym, man. You could build an incredible body. You could have a body like the guy in the game if you actually stopped playing the game and went in. Or
No,
I've heard,
that's great.
yeah.
At first when I saw your article, I was like, I don't think, I mean, I'm a physician,
Hmm.
so I've prescribed a lot of medications in my life. I don't remember prescribing dopamine per se, but I was thinking when I saw it first, is there some kind of like dopamine now? Because who knows? It's one of those things that people want to do. But
Hmm.
I was mentioning in our green room that I had a long-term medical practice. I did primary care,
Hmm.
but in the mid 2000s, I started writing Suboxone to get people off narcotics. And I
Hmm.
had a particular way about doing them. Can I bore you with like a quick
Yes, yes.
story? So, uh, this Goldilocks,
Hmm.
she's got the bed that's too soft, the bed that's too hard, and then she finds
Hmm.
one that's just right. She does things with the porridge and everything else, the pillows and whatnot. So, for my taste, the detoxing, getting people on narcotics, and they have this short detox. They they call it spin dry. They used to call it spin dry. It's too
Mhm.
quick. You're spun dry and you're kind of dizzy, and
Mhm.
you get out there and go back into drugs. Some people do it just to kind of lower the amount their financial layout because they're spending $200 a day or something like that on heroin, and they do the detox, as it were, not expecting to get clean, but now they're down to $50 a day in a week,
Mhm.
so they can kind of ratchet up a little bit and kind of work within their financial means. And then there's the most of the treatment these days
Mhm.
is maintenance, which is kind of a forever thing, years and potentially forever, replacing the hair of the dog. Now,
Mhm.
if I'm crazy or logical. I don't know which. Maybe somewhere between the two. But I notice when we have alcoholics,
Mhm.
we sober them up.
Mhm.
We kind of I frankly think that faith, religion, finding God, finding your place, finding your dignity, your integrity, any or all of those, some mix of those is the way to get clean from alcohol, and that's fairly well acknowledged. AA,
Mhm.
in a sense, a religious, quasi-religious organization, and or the regular ones,
Mhm.
and people can do it in other means, but that seems to be the best. Um, but we don't do forever. We don't maintain or replace people's alcohol. If they're addicted to
Mhm.
whiskey, we don't say, "Here, this it looks like water. Drink this stuff every few hours."
Mhm.
What is it? What is it? It's vodka. We don't do vodka replacement for alcohol. And so my feeling is, I kind of wanted to do the Goldilocks approach, and not too long, not too short, not do the kind of spin dry ones, but give people, as it turns out, like 3 or 4 months to detox. And
Mhm.
along the way, I was testing them, and not just drug testing them, but trying to get them tested and tried it, and find their lives. So I had a YouTube page, I still do, called "Get Your
Mhm.
Life Back," because that's really the essential. Getting people off the drug is one thing, but unless people can get their lives back, they don't do it well. So here's the
Mhm.
point I just wanted to get to, which is
Mhm.
really the dopamine point. So I had these kind of inspirational, or hopefully inspirational videos, and one of them basically centered around this concept of porno or the prom.
Mhm.
So, the example I would give to patients, in which I made this into about a 3 or 4 minute movie at one point. It's kind of a gross thing to think about, porn or the prom, but if you just want your endorphins, which is the endogenous morphines, it's named for morphine, endorphin. If you just want that, like say the dopamine kick or whatever, the quickest, most reliable thing is not to go to the prom, which is kind
Mhm.
of it's a long way in the future. You have to ask somebody. There's a whole bunch of work you have to put in, and you have to spend money. You have to go out. You got to get your hair done, whatever. You got to do all these things, and then it may not work out. You might have a fight. Things don't, and
Mhm.
nobody's guaranteeing anything, whatever. And so it doesn't mean you're going to get your little endorphin orgasmic rush. Whereas porno is very reliable. You
Right.
know, you know, guys do this, unfortunately, any number of times per day, and so forth. So if you just want the drug, the endorphins, um, I'm not recommending it, but you should do the porno route, because that is a reliable way to get it. However, people feel miserable. The
Mhm.
prom is again much less reliable on the endorphin, on the orgasmic high bit,
Mhm.
but it's a much more nearly guaranteed way of making your life whole. So there you have it. So I actually align and actually, possibly predate, in a sense, your thoughts about this, but I think you have it right, that people, we are not little machines where we're going to put tokens in and make the video game in our brain go. We have to be guided and molded, and we have to be in accord with our best selves. And I think this is in a sense our religion, and the essence of religions, plural.
I do something, and I've been doing this since 2017, called a jar of awesome. And this is an idea I got from Tim Ferriss, podcaster, brilliant guy. If you've never heard of him, great guy to look up and listen to his stuff. But basically, the thought process behind it is this: we have a great tendency as human beings to remember horrible and bad things that happen to us. If someone calls you an ugly or something, you'll probably remember that for the next 6 months, right? It
It happens
sticks
to me
with
a
you.
lot. You can just imagine.
So let's say someone insults you, remember it. But the good things we tend to just blur out. We forget about them. And there's so many little good things that happen to us that we just forget about them. And when we're sitting around thinking, what do we think about? We think about all the bad stuff. It's easy to come to memory. We don't think about the good ones. So what you do with a jar of awesome is, something really good happens for you. You just write it down and you put it in a jar, and then you've got them. You just store them for the whole year. And for me, like, I've been doing that for a long time, and I've gone back through, I've looked at them, And there's big things in there too. There's having Rush Limbaugh talk about, my webpage and the show. There's be a top 50 self-help book. There's, lifting records. There's all kinds of cool stuff in there, and personal lifting records.
Mhm.
So, but what you look at is they're all doing stuff. There's never going to be one where you're saying, hey, yeah, I had the best night of my life. I sat on the couch watching Netflix, eating fried chicken and Twinkies. That is never going to be the best night of your life. You might have the best night of your life, out eating the best calamari you've ever had in Las Vegas. Or I did this one time for my 50th birthday. I went out and I crushed a car with a bulldozer, which you can do in Vegas. That is really cool. I like thinking about that. But you're never going to have that experience at home. Anna Lemke, who wrote a amazing book about dopamine called Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence, she said she had an addiction to romance novels. She would read them incessantly. She said she was just like, she got done with one, she had to start reading the other. But I mean, think about that. If that is you and you're single, well, couldn't you be out finding a boyfriend?
Right.
Why are you sitting at home reading the romance novel? So that's kind of the thing. It's trying to keep people on what's important for them, what's going to make their life better. And there's a million things that are designed to be easy for you, but all the fun stuff is the expensive dopamine. It's the stuff that you got to go out and do. It's the stuff you got to work for. That's the stuff that at the end of your life, you're going to look back on and be proud of. It's not going to be the night you watch a whole season of The Office on Netflix at home.
No, I like that. I think you're absolutely right. You don't look 50, by the way.
I am actually older than that, my friend. I'm 52. I'm getting way up there.
You probably had a head start, I guess, huh?
I got started early and I haven't stopped since I was young.
So, what are your prospects now? I mean, how do you? Well, actually, what I'd like to ask is some of your other recent articles.
Sure.
What resonates, and maybe we could go over some of the themes. Your blog post is called Culturcidal. So what's the essence there, and what are you finding at getting traction?
Well, part of it is, as someone who's done the outrage bait and use stuff and can do it by heart, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to get into the diehard, political day to day. What's the poll numbers in Florida stuff? I wanted to get around to some stuff that's more meaningful. And I believe that Andrew Breitbart was right when he says that politics is downstream from culture. And the only way to fix what's going on with America today is to fix the culture. So we talk a lot, or I say we, that's the royal we, it's me. I talk a lot about culture on there. I throw in some economics. There's a little bit of self-help stuff in there because I enjoy that too. And a little bit about keeping the country together, because I think we have finally hit a point that we are so far gone that there's an outside chance. I'm not saying we're getting ready to have a civil war tomorrow. I don't believe that, but we're getting to an outside chance here where this country could split up. I mean, you can start to see these scenarios playing out and go, well, that goes south there, that goes south there. Next thing you know, we've got the country splitting into pieces. So I think that would be bad. I think we need to work to fix these things. I don't think that things just go right by going with the flow. A culture has to be designed, at least to an extent. People have to know what they're trying to do. It has to be maintained. It doesn't just happen. I think Thomas Sowell said, every generation is an invasion by a group of little barbarians that have to be civilized. And that's where we are as a country right now. So that's the kind of issues I wanted to tackle with it. A lot of them, I don't want to say a lot of them, there's a lot of different varying things, but one of the things you end up talking about a lot these days that you certainly didn't 20 years ago is gender. Gender was just not really, let me put it this way. I don't know anybody who, when I was growing up, who thought maybe they were the wrong gender. There was just nobody going, maybe I'm a man. Maybe I've never wondered in my life, maybe I'm a woman. Maybe that's never literally, it's just like never crossed my mind. And that's standard. That's not anything unusual. You've seen that huge influx of that question. You've seen that pop up. That's something that's happened very recently. And there are reasons for it. There are reasons for it. We're promoting it is a big part of the reason that's
Absolutely.
coming out. So, and I mean, one of the things I wrote today, I wrote an article called Why America, this came out today, Why America Should Never Have Another Pride Month.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I actually want to put that one up. Maybe you can tell us
Sure.
your reasons, rationales
Absolutely.
there.
Well, and first of all, I opened up with this, and this is very true. You know, when I was growing up, it was very stigmatizing for people to be gay. Like, if you think people have trouble coming out to their parents now, it's 10 times tougher. People would make fun of you specifically for being gay. It was not cool. So you look at all that and you go, well, I understand why Pride Month exists in the first place. But the flip side that nobody wants to acknowledge, or not a lot of people do, is that's completely changed. If anything, gay Americans are essentially a protected class in America. They are you get actual. I mean, I hear this from parents. There are straight kids who get peer pressure to be gay, which is a weird thing. It would have never happened
No,
20 years ago. It would have been considered the most bizarre thing anyone's ever heard of, but it's a real thing these days. And there's a reason people make jokes about the alphabet mafia coming for you if you say something mean about gay people. So there's that little thing about it, that really the whole reason for this Pride Month existing in the first place no longer really does. Although nobody ever declares victory in their little, activist wars and goes home. Everybody keeps saying, how do we, keep getting more attention and money out of this? But there's other problems with it too. I think a lot of groups have glommed onto this that really don't fit in it. I don't think transgender people really should be part of Pride Month. They're mentally ill people. That's who they are. We should be treating them like that. They're not some sort of civil rights issue. The pronoun crowd who doesn't know what pronouns they are today. And well, today I'm she and her. Next week I'll be they and them. Those people have issues, but they're not. I don't see them as someone who deserves to be lauded or deserves to be
no,
destigmatized. Hmm.
there's a lot wrong with that. Andrew Clavin, um,
Hmm.
who is with the Daily Wire, and I love his stuff. I listen as
Hmm.
often as I can. Hilarious, great, and he's a great writer, by the way.
Hmm.
Great crime novels and so forth. Um, but he says, as a creative type, and he's been in Hollywood and had to write. He's and before that, his dad. I grew up in New York City. His dad, Gene Clavin, was kind of an entertainment figure, big radio guy, and so he's parties at his household had creatives, and it's New
Hmm.
York City, so there were gay people there and so forth. He said he's never had a particular problem with people doing what they want to do, and I
Hmm.
guess he's kind of got a more libertarian aspect to this, despite the fact he actually is a he grew up culturally Jewish, and he converted to Christianity, and so his theme is oftentimes religious,
Hmm.
but he's kind of a live and let live. His son Spencer Clavin is gay, um,
Hmm.
and they get along. And he maintains that Spencer's one of the best men he knows. And he makes the divide between being gay and doing activism. And
Hmm.
frankly, oftentimes whenever I hear the word community, we all like community. I like to live in a community. I like to be part of a community. But this appellation community has been attached to basically divide.
Hmm.
It's a segmentation of people. Um, Original. I'm going to give you. I apologize, but one minute.
Hmm.
Original Marxism,
Hmm.
and probably goes back to the French Revolution. Before that, Plato's Republic and so forth. It's not necessarily a new concept, but Soviet Marxism was their theme song was the Internationale, the international, and the idea was to have international communism, workers of the world unite, and that didn't necessarily work because people have they have ethnicities, they have the same language, they have the same
Hmm.
songs, they grew up watching the same shows and so forth, and so the Mussolini and then Hitler tried national
Hmm.
socialism. So the idea was that you're going to still do socialism and
Hmm.
have this kind of cronyistic aspect, this kind of fascism of getting the corporations and the government aligned, and you're going to have socialist ideals. You're going to take away the aspect of the free market, but it's going to be national stuff. So you're going to have these anyway. But in one form or another, it winds up having a division. So in the Soviets, it was a division between classes. So the workers are supposed to hate the kulaks who own property, and they're supposed to hate the various elites. And in Cambodia, people with eyeglasses were put in camps. In Maoist China, that was the Cultural Revolution, where if you had any books in your home, you were so that was kind of this class division. And then the National Socialism aspect is ethnic. So you get rid of the Jews, you get rid of this, everything becomes tribal. But in one form or another, these things only prosper insofar as they can be called prosper, as they bring so much misery, is by division. And so all these communities that we get is kind of a splintering, and it gets away from the melting pot concept, where we are going to anneal and make steel out of various types of metals put together that can be stronger than any of the individual ones. And I mean, that's a terrible word, but you wind up doping the iron with softer metals sometimes. But weirdly enough, they can make a cohesive, stronger metal. I'm not saying diversity is always a strength, but there's certain aspects of a society that require different types of people and whatnot. But these things have become perverted and inverted to get people at each other, and that's the means by which kind of an enslavement occurs, to get people away from their own best interests, which oftentimes, and again, the free market concept involves helping each other. We we are uniquely a helpful species, and we can do so much for each other. I can't. I mean, literally, there's a book called The Pencil, I think it's called.
I've read that.
We're literally, if you and I were alone or even together, it would take us decades, if we had no other tools, to make a pencil, if ever. And we could probably never make one as good as happens organically, in a sense. Anyway, I apologize for that diatribe, but it's an interesting point you bring up, with these kind of divisions. And so, just as far as the Andrew Klavan's point, it's not a matter of just being gay anymore. It's a matter of taking over the narrative and having kind of the activist part, which has some certain agenda that don't really fall in with society. I mean, what the real outlaws these days are people who are obeying the law and not changing their figures, their faces, their sex, and kind of trying to keep the world populated with the next generation.
One of the points I've made about that general topic is, and I don't think enough people consider that, is, are the people you copying, is it working? Like, are they happy people? I think it's so interesting that you hear this stuff all the time. It's like, well, you should go be trans. You should go, split your gender. You should, go with critical race theory. And it's like, well, none of these people seem happy. You're telling me that trans people have a 40% suicide rate. All I see is people with different genders complaining all the time because people don't use their pronouns. Critical race theory people are some of the most unhappy people anyone's ever seen. They're constantly aggrieved. Same thing you could say about modern feminists. And it's like, none of these people are happy people. Why do you want to copy them? And I think that's something we should be asking. I mean, there are principles that work. We can find people that are happy and successful. Why don't we want to be more like them? Why aren't we just as a little side note related to the affirmative action decision we had? Why aren't there more people saying, what are Asians in America doing right? They're getting into colleges. They have the highest income of any group in America. What are Asians doing right that we should be copying? You don't hear people doing that. You hear people, it's terrible as Asians. They're knocking other people out. It's like, what are you, out of school? And it's just ludicrous.
That's the amazing part. As the kind of communism marched towards one world government, we see, the World Economic Forum and all these things that, through the WHO and the last COVID pandemic, a lot of these things are trying to march us towards this one world government. We get rid of nationalities. And even the famous John Lennon song "Imagine," if you actually listen to it, it's pretty scary. It's it's got a nice song, I guess, and people play it as if it's a real upbeat thing. But when people get rid of the individual governments, you're going to get rid of the competition between those governments. You're not going to have some place to go to when your place goes sour. Venezuela, a lot of these countries don't start out say, how can we make our countries a bad word, has to do with poop and a hole. How can we make our countries a bleep hole country?
Hmm.
Well, they don't. They're working on utopian concepts. And they all go down the same kind of the same chute, whether it's North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, China at various times and so forth. And they're not going into it saying, "Oh, how can we make ourselves miserable?" But what
Hmm.
happens is they do, and if you and the people who want to leave those places, if every place were under this one government, and that government winds up failing, there's no place to go. I mean, rocket ships are hard, to procure, and we're not really
Hmm.
sure there's any place else you can go and breathe on a regular basis. And we've unfortunately seen that from the Ocean Gate. It's hard to go, underwater. So where do you go? This one world government. I used to have debates with a patient of mine, an older guy, and that's all he wanted was one world government. It's kind of a Soros-ian type of thing. And he
Hmm.
was a nice guy in many ways, an idealist, but wrong. And
Hmm.
the only way to have these things proved out as wrong is to have competition between them. So competition between ideas, competition between thought, competition in the intellectual marketplace. And it's not to say you or I are correct, although we do
Hmm.
have the word right. um, attached.
Hmm.
But absent that, you're going to never get the best idea.
Yeah, and as to one world government, it would be interesting to know if your patient would be like, okay, we'll have one world government. This John Hawkins guy I'm interviewing, he's going to be running it. How do you feel about it now? And if his answer would be, oh, it's great, all right, he's sincere. But what he really imagines is people he likes and agrees with running it. And that's not how anything ever works. Naval Ravikant, I did some of his quotes not so long ago. Smart guy in a lot of ways. But one of the things he said is when you create a system and you want to know if it's a good system, it's designed to manage things, what if someone you really dislike is running it? Do you still feel like it's a good system for managing things? And if the answer is no, then your system needs some work.
Mm,
So yeah, but speaking
yeah.
of systems, one of the things I wrote about recently, Jesse Kelly. Don't I'm assuming you've heard of him. He's a big
Mm,
radio host on Twitter. He got in a little bit of trouble not so long ago for saying that America's headed towards America is going to have a dictator. That he said it the way he said it was it needs a dictator, not needs like an actual you need one, but you're preparing yourself for a dictator with the way you're handling things. And, I think a lot of people, and I write about this from a lot of different angles, are not, I think we're getting to the point where we're doing some stuff that's very dangerous for the continued continuity of our society without really even thinking about it. Like, for example, one of the things Democrats talk about all the time now is, well, we're going to go in and we're going to add a bunch of people to the Supreme Court. Okay. Well, let's say you do that to get your way. Um, number one, is the court going to be considered legitimate anymore? Like, I don't know if I'm Florida and I disagree with the court and you just added 5 people to it. And I say, well, no, I'm not doing that anymore. Is it legitimate when Republicans get back in and add 6 more people to it? And eventually, when you start playing games like that, when you start saying, hey, we're going to change the rules and get rid of filibusters, and we're going to change the Supreme Court so that, we can be in
right.
charge, what you realize is the only way to keep those kind of changes in place is to lock the other party out of power. And so you change the rules, you got one party government. Does anyone think the country's going to survive like that? Like, let's say the Democrats were completely locked out of power. Does anyone think the country would survive if you just said, listen, we're going to change the rules so Democrats can never be president again? So Democrats can never have any power, or the Republicans the same way?
Yeah.
No, it's not
Yeah.
going to. And we're
No,
playing with things like that
the
all
only
the
thing
time now.
the only thing we actually really like watching,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there are these various competition shows, whether it's cooking shows or singing
Mm-hmm.
shows, talent shows, sports, baseball, football, so forth. If when the rare occasions it turns out that the referee's been taking money on the side or the players are betting on the
Mm-hmm.
game, that people are outraged and those people are expelled from their organization. And if Simon Cowell, had been taking bribes to let some singer, or I don't keep up with the shows, but if Dancing with the Stars, it turns out that there's chicanery going on, people would stop watching it. There's no thrill to it. Having the fix in, so we need kind of neutral judgments and all these things. And
Mm-hmm.
but as far as power goes, because people I think, are all getting a piece of it. All those things get thrown away. So it really just becomes win at any cost, and we'll worry about things later. And I think we saw that in the last election on multiple levels.
Mhm.
Um, there's a debatable point whether there was, election, misuse on the day of. In medicine, there's renal disease, kidney disease, and there's three different categories. There's pre-renal, post-renal, and renal. So I'm not going to get into it, but they have to do with whether it's before the kidney, in the kidney, or within the urinary tract on the way out, so forth, whether you have kidney stones, so forth. They have different names. But the way I looked at the election is that it was pre-renal. It was before the election. A lot of the things that happened were, were kind of soft rigging of the
Mhm.
elections. The omission of events, the omission of news, and whatnot, and the type of things that people hear, and the type of things that get prosecuted and not get prosecuted, and so forth. And then, of course, misuse of COVID to have mail-in ballots, which I think was part of the reason some of these policies came into being, and the way the way the essentially bad flu was exaggerated so that people would stay indoors and stay afraid, and people in fear, people divided. These are the people who are malleable, and these people who get to be ruled and misused. And it's kind of a sadness with the enthusiasm. So many people apply this as long as they think they're on the winning team.
Mhm.
Um, it's an oddity. Um, so I'm going to ask you a separate question.
Mhm.
If I can apologize for my diatribes, but where do you get your inspiration? How do you keep going? What's the machine that generates the things that you're going to produce and so forth? Are you viewer based? Are you looking at the things that people like, or do you have a guiding principle?
Well, I've done the one where it's just get as many people as humanly possible. I've done that before. My goal has always been I've kind of followed, I've had somebody whose career I've wanted to follow and wanted to be more like. It's Thomas Sowell. And you look at what did Thomas Sowell do his whole career? He taught, but he also went out and he wrote columns, he wrote books. And I think that's a great way to go about it. I don't want to be just I don't want to be one of the people in the rat race just trying to get people at any cost, because I think that's a lot of what's wrong with the conservative movement today is people who are just saying anything to get attention, whether it's right or wrong. I want to go out and talk about things I think are important, and I want to talk about things that didn't necessarily just get the best views on Facebook. I wanted to talk about some of the issues we've been talking about today that I think are important for the continuation of our society.
Mhm.
So that's what I enjoy doing. I'm in a good place because of the stuff I did before to talk about that, get it out to a decent sized audience. And I'm just going to keep grinding on that. And, there's sometimes other stuff that excites me. Like I did seriously consider diving all the way into, cryptocurrency. I very seriously considered, going into that space. But you know what? I like this space. I'm going to keep doing it. Got a lot of friends here. There's nothing more important than continuing the success and prosperity of our country for future generations. And
Mhm.
I'm going to try to do my part in that.
Well, I appreciate that. So we're going to maybe call it an early evening
Mhm.
um, at some point. I want people to see your book,
Mhm.
so I'm going to put it up here. Um, and I actually like it. I have not read it. I have not
Mhm.
purchased it, but I was looking through the table of contents. So let's see, where is it? It's 101 things all young adults should know. Um, so you have 149 ratings, so it has apparently sold. Um, and tell us what your formulations were in this book, and do you have any other books out, and do you have any other books in the offing?
I am working on a book. I don't want to say too much about it till I, get more details done on it. It's going to be a short book that will be coming out at the end of the year. And there's a longer book I'm working on too. But the book, I want to tell you 101 things all young adults should know is not something that is all about me being a genius. It's all about me being a little older and having lived life and having done a lot of stuff, because I'm just going to tell you, most of us as we get older, we learn a lot of things the hard way. And we're lucky enough to talk to some successful people, and we make some mistakes, and we just figure out all these things about life that are complete mysteries to you when you're 20 years old. And I think you can do that with a lot of these. Like you can just pick, just about any one of them. Just take 64. You beat 50% of the people just by showing up, another 40% by working hard. The last 10%'s a dogfight. so much of life is like that. You will beat half the people out there just by showing up at all. You can get a long way at pretty much any job with that formula. I mean,
Mhm.
you can do that with a lot of things in the book. And I wanted to give people something that would help them get a decade or two ahead of their peers, people
Well,
that are
that's a
that
nice thing.
age. Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I had on recently the economist George Gilder. I don't know if
Hmm.
you've heard of him.
I've heard of them. Yeah.
He's 83 years old now, and
Hmm.
he's awesome. He's been awesome for decades. He was he was in I think the Reagan circle of
Hmm.
economic advisors and so forth. I'm not saying officially, but his work has always been highly considered. And
Hmm.
I was shocked he said yes when I asked him, because he's one of my kind of I'm a medical doctor, but I like to learn about other things,
Hmm.
and his books have been one of the guiding lights for me. And he's a really clear writer. He's got a book right now called Life After Capitalism,
Hmm.
and capitalism itself, the title is an insult. It's a little bit like the Ivy League. Both of those were pejorative terms applied to insult the organization. Um, so the Ivy League was just as it sounds, like a bunch of snooty people behind ivy walls. Anyway, they've adopted and they've run with it. Every now and then this happens. The sports, it's kind of sports like the dog pen,
Hmm.
whatever. The people kind of they like the insults they're given,
Hmm.
and so capitalism was an insult um, by Karl Marx on the
Hmm.
free market system. But that be that as it may, he George Gilder talks about where we are in capitalism and where it's going, and a lot of what you have in your book is similar. It's the knowledge, the real wealth, and Gilder's proposition for this book is that the real scarcity is time.
Hmm.
We don't have real scarcity of other things because we're so adaptive. At one point, if we don't have enough, say 100 years ago, we don't have enough whale oil, we start hunting for other things.
Hmm.
They were literally whale. People were positing that we're going to run out of whale oil, and what are we going to do then? How are we going to light our cities? Um, and the humans move right along. They try other things and they're adaptive. So the real, wealth is knowledge. And if you can give people an extra 10 years notch their belt up, that is going to create wealth for them. I hope it does for you as well. um, and you might look at his book. It's awesome book. I learned so much. He brings kind of an information sensibility to
Hmm.
economics. So I think Thomas Sowell would be in line with a lot of what he says as well, and he's
Hmm.
one of my heroes also. I've got him up on the shelf there as well.
Yeah, I've
uh,
interviewed him like 10 times. Big
have you
fan of
really?
his. Yeah.
Is he still doing anything? He's 93 or something like
He
that.
is he's I think technically retired, but he still writes books.
Oh,
He's still
wonderful.
out there
I'd
writing.
love to see those interviews. So speaking of writing books, I'm going to kind of round things out by giving my own personal shameless self
Hmm.
promotion here. Um, and let's see. Let me put this up here. So I just kind of it's changing subjects a little bit. It's not economics. This is my book, Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. It's a fascinating topic. This was the number one medical news item in 2016 in the before times, before this other pandemic thing that has kind of blotted all our memories from so much else. It's got a book comes with a picture of me in the morning, um, and it is kind of a fascinating thing to take into account retrospectively, because so many things that went wrong in COVID, sort of you get a little bit of the hints of how they might go wrong with Zika microcephaly, because things people made their thoughts, they had conjectures, and they just ran with them. There was very little proof. And how do we know this is true? Well, because there's been no Zika microcephaly anywhere on Earth, including Brazil, ever since that first year. There were no Zika tests that first year. There was no firm way of figuring out who and who did not have microcephaly. Zika is a real virus. Microcephaly is a real problem, but just so happens it turns out that one doesn't cause the other. But there's been no retraction, and there's going to be a Zika vaccine around the corner, probably in the next 12 months, and no doubt it's going to be mandated, to billions of people throughout the tropics. I think big pharma and big public health are going to do this lockstep, and somebody's going to benefit along the way, but not necessarily the people who are not getting any microcephaly in excess. It's 1 out of 3 or 400 cases of pregnancy will have some form of microcephaly. So this is a forever thing with humans, as long as we have babies. But it just doesn't happen to be related to Zika or dengue, which Zika is a category of. Anyway, so that's my little thing. I like people to hear about the book because they can help support my podcast by buying it. If they read it, that's an extra benefit, but at least they buy it. So I'm going to give the last word to you, and before we wish each other a great evening.
I'm going to toss in one quick side note with the last thing, because your book reminded me of it. You talk about the junk science behind Zika, and I'm not an expert on that, so I don't know. But there's a lot of junk science with what we're going on with COVID. A lot of people in the scientific community just took their best guesses, and then they put it out there like it was law brought down by Moses from the mountain. And one other thing I want to say that a lot of people haven't noticed, since we're getting on this last note here, is they've been doing the same thing with global warming for a long time. They don't know anything about climate science. Climate science today is about where medicine was for the Greeks 2,000 years ago. It's where it's at. We don't know anything about what's going on. We cannot predict what the weather is going to look like in 20 years, much less 100 years. They've been getting model after model after model of these things wrong. And yet they're spending unbelievable sums, $500 million, to get you to do things, to influence you. I'm just saying it's really not about global warming, a lot of it. And if you start digging into what's going on with that, you're going to find out that a lot of the same junk science things that you're talking about with Zika, that you saw with COVID, almost all of it is done the exact same way with global.
Well, a lot of times you don't know. A lot of times you can realize it's science when the answer is shut up.
You know what? You really know it's real science, and people are like, well, this is what we think, but we're really not sure. When everybody's super sure about everything, that's when you know you're getting into politics.
No, it's a funny thing. There is no such thing as follow the science, because the science, there's basically two definitions of science. Science really comes from the same word as knowledge. So there's knowledge, the body of knowledge, which has been accumulated. Then there's the other science, which is the actual scientific process, which is trial and error, a little bit like we were talking about with competition in the marketplace, to figure out what it actually is. There are some things that seem so obvious that we can all accept it. Like if I drop these eyeglasses, a dozen times, they're all pretty much going to go the same direction. That being said, gravitational theory is very hard, and there are, alterations in these theories as time goes on. There's no such thing as fixed science.
Right.
And anytime that you start taking a vote of 97% of scientists say one thing or another, especially when they're all getting paid from the same kind of format, it's like asking 97% of soldiers whether they're going to obey the top in command. Even if they think differently, they're unlikely to step out of line to do that. So having science be that kind of same formulation only shows that people are, basically they're trainable and they're threatenable. But it's not actual science, which has to do with reproducibility. So in the case of Zika microcephaly, I don't want to harp on this, but all their hypotheses have not been shown to be correct, and nobody says a word about it. There's $1 billion industry going. It's not as big as COVID, but there's $1 billion industry that has created a Zika research establishment, and nobody's going to come out and say thanks, I don't need this money, because it's not really a thing. And so I'm kind of like the child in the Emperor's New Clothes, pointing this stuff out, that the emperor is buying flimsier and flimsier clothing until there's nothing really there. And anyway, my issue I think is important, but it's very peripheral. I can't really kind of wedge it into people's consciousness.
Yeah, well, it ties in, and I've written about some of this stuff recently too. With science, we've gotten to the point that, one, it's become incredibly expensive. I was talking to a guy the other day who was part of a drug study, right? He goes out, he goes there for 2 months. I think he was getting paid something ludicrous like $15,000. Well, I say ludicrous. I mean, it's 2 months of his time. Is it worth $15,000? But you start thinking about that. People are paying that kind of money. Then you get all the money going in one direction. And what happens? Well, suddenly every finding supports that direction, because that's where the money's coming from. Absolutely. And this is a big problem for us in science, with drugs, with a lot of things that are going on, in that we're not necessarily getting what we want to see out of science. We want to see unbiased people going out and trying to find the truth and get us the best information. And instead, we're not going in that direction because there's profits involved. There's people who are paying for it involved. And you know what happens if you say, well, you hired me, I looked at it, I think you're wrong. I think your product's going to kill people. Guess what? You never get another dime from these people. Or I think your product doesn't work, or I think there's a better, cheaper way to do it. We're setting up financial incentives that pervert science, and this is running all the way through science. And again, I'm not an expert on Zika, you are, so that sounds like what's happening there. But it happened with COVID. It's happened definitely
I mean,
in a lot of other areas.
Fortunately, we're both sitting down, so
Mhm.
we can't fall over or anything like that. But humans are corruptible.
Very, including scientists. And I'm not saying all scientists are corrupt. Some of
No,
them
no,
are very
no.
honest and
It's a
good.
human thing, and
Right.
I think that people, what I've learned from COVID is that, well, I've got two brothers, and one's kind of nicer than the other. We'll leave it there. But they're both Yankee fans. I grew up in New York City, and I don't really care that much. And so my kids grew up following the Red Sox insofar as
Hmm.
they cared, and they didn't care that much. And but one of the less nice brother, he I'm not joking. He thinks I'm like a traitor, like a horrible traitor for not maintaining my Yankeeness while I'm in Boston. That's something. And mind you, I have enough contrary opinions already. You know, I don't need just to be walking with my Yankee hat all through town. And mind you, I didn't care.
Hmm.
I like playing baseball. I played a lot of softball and I played a lot of sports in my life. Probably I don't know more than he has, perhaps. Um, but anyway, my point is a lot of this comes down to simple allegiance stuff. Like
Hmm.
when the Yankees gave up, or he re-signed Johnny Damon. We had Johnny Damon, and he wound up moving to the Yankees. One day my brother's hating Johnny Damon. The next day he has to love him, and he is loving him. And this happens in sports. It's like,
Hmm.
but this winds up being an allegiance thing. I think it's very deep within our souls. That we are tribal, and we've kind of have this big mess of society. And there's so many things going on that we've lost track of. And what really kind of motivates us, everyone thinks they want to be out, buy some kind of tropical island, live by themselves, or live on the top of a hill, and that gets old. What people really want is they want to be part of a crowd where they don't where they can yell and scream and jump up and down and have 100 people doing exactly the same things with them.
Hmm.
That's exhilarating. So we all really want to be part of a thing, and so we get it at sports stadiums, and now and then we get it by jeering it at the anti-vaxxed, the unvaxxed, or whatever. And
Hmm.
not we, but that's what people do. They've brought team sports to all these various communities, these sub-fractions of the human experience. Anyway, so now we've solved humanity. I don't know what we do next. I suppose we have just the rest of the night to, maybe have a beer or something like that.
I'm getting ready to make some shrimp myself. Dinner's got to come up.
All right. Well, this was awesome, John. I'd love to do this again.
Anytime, my friend. I've enjoyed it.
All right. So I'm going to end the conversation. We're going to say goodbye to everybody else. You and I can chat for a minute, though. Thank you, John.
Thank you.